Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "What are you going to do, sit on me?" Okay. My parents used to own a laundromat, and every so often I would help them clean it up, collect the money. They had a seating area with a few benches for customers to sit on, and a few magazines and kids' books to read, generally old stuff that was donated, or from the dollar store. One day we noticed that all the magazines, books were missing, not a huge deal as they were all months old, cheap books, and that happened every so often. So we just refilled the books, and cleaned the machines. A few days later it happened again, all the books were gone. Again a bit frustrating, but not a big deal. We refilled them again and continued cleaning. But then it happened again a few days later, and a few days again after that. We were actually getting low on kids' books, and had to buy some more from the dollar store. My dad and I finally had a look at the security cameras for the last few days, and we saw the same guy came in at about 1 p.m. He was short, bald with a brown coat. He would walk in the front door, go straight to the back, grab all the books, put them in his coat and then walk out. My dad was upset. He said he was going to take the day off work to wait for this guy and ask him to not come back. I told my dad I would do it, as this was a side business for him, and I wasn't working at the time. He told me to be stern, but not to hurt him or anything. I was there the next day between 12 to 2 p.m, just before 1:30 I see him. Short, bald, brown coat. Our security cameras weren't the best, so I waited until I saw him grab the books before I walked over, just in case it was the wrong guy who just happened to look the same. But as soon as I saw him start to stuff them into his coat, I walked over. "Excuse me. I'm a theater-trained actor," so it boomed a bit, and made him jump. "Please put those back." He looked at me, and to be honest he didn't look 100% there, but he understood that he had been caught. He spoke softly, I'm sorry, I just like looking at the pictures." I eased back a little. "That's fine, you're more than welcome to look at them while doing your laundry, but you're not allowed to just come in here and take them." He put the books back on the table. "I'm sorry," he repeated as he quickly walked out the door. He looked like he had gotten the idea. I quickly cleaned up, and headed home. We thought that would be the end of it, until the next day when everything was gone again. We checked the security cameras again, and it was him again. This time my dad went on a Saturday, and I saw the camera footage after. Basically the same, but my dad actually reached into his coat and took the magazines out. We didn't have audio, but I could tell he was yelling at him. My dad told me that he told him if it happened again he was going to call the police. And then he asked to make sure the guy understood, which we saw him clearly not on camera, so apparently he did, and my dad let him leave. A few days later all the books were gone again, and the cameras showed it was the same guy again. My dad actually took a few days off work, and we went all afternoon to the laundromat. We saw him come in once, and my dad yelled at him to leave, basically chasing him out with a broom. Again telling him he's going to call the cops. Finally the day came. My dad and I were there as well as a regular customer. He was a farmer, about 300 pounds. My dad and I went to the restaurant a few stores over and picked up some takeout for lunch. On our way back we saw the laundromat door close just as we left the restaurant. We didn't think much until we go in, and the guy was back shoving the books into his coat. My dad lost it, and charged at him yelling about calling the police. He turned and looked at us bolting for the door. I quickly blocked him, shoving him backwards. He tried to go a different way around a table, but the farmer was there blocking him. "Please just let me leave," he asked. But my dad, who was on the phone, said no, we've given him plenty of chances, and he is going to wait for the police. My dad and I are larger guys, and like I said the farmer was pushing 300 pounds. He looked at us all, and smugly said, "You can't keep me here. What are you going to do, sit on me?" I heard the farmer say, "Okay," as he charged the guy, pushing him back onto the bench, and he sat right on top of him. The guy squirmed a little, but there wasn't much he could do. He yelled for help, but there was no one around but us. The police showed up, and the farmer finally got up. The guy tried to run past the police, but they were able to catch him. Turns out he was known to police because he would steal small things from the other stores around there. He lived in a halfway house nearby, and one of the police who showed up was actually one of his mentors in his spare time. He asked us not to press charges, which my dad said he wouldn't as long as he never came in here again. He agreed, and other than the odd time seeing him walking through the parking lot, he never actually did come back in again. We gave the farmer a free load of laundry as a thank you. And I like to think he taught that guy a valuable lesson: don't mess with fat guys. Edit. Oh, my dad was telling me about his call to 911 afterwards. I wish I had a recording of it. He said they said, 911, what is the emergency? And he said, I caught someone stealing my coloring books, and the operator paused for a second, and said, coloring books? The next one is titled, My First Grade Teacher, Write Exactly as I Do. Me, you asked for it. By the time I entered first grade at the local Catholic school, I had already mastered handwriting, if not spelling, and so I already had my own style of perfectly legible, not sloppy script. My teacher, a nun called Sister Kathleen, was a real hard butt. She was very old and very rickety. Her frail body would shake and tremble as she screamed at her students in her shrill, reedy voice, calling us spineless little know-nothings and accusing us of having no backbone. That was her favorite, you have no backbone. She looked and acted like a villain drawn by Quentin Blake in some Roald Dahl book. One day she stood at the board, her trembling hand drawing boring block letters, and expecting us to follow along, drawing our own in our big sheaf tablets. She looked at me and noticed that I wasn't doing as she told us. I had skipped ahead, filling my page, and was now busy drawing. Emilio Earhart, she screamed, come here now. If you won't do your classwork in your own ledger, then you can do it right here, for all the class to see. I approached the chalkboard and she shoved a piece of chalk in my hand and she said, I want you to write exactly as I do. So I did. I took the chalk, and with my hand trembling just as her hand trembled, I drew a shaky, wavery, big block letter A. I started on B, but she slapped the chalk out of my hand and she said, be gone with you. You have no backbone. The next one is titled, Micromanager? You better check on me, then. I was a janitor at an enormous church in an American suburb. The campus was large enough to have a dozen bathrooms, several acres of carpet, and miles of hallways across 3 to 4 floors. It was typical on weekdays, when there weren't thousands of people there to attend a church service, to only give the bathrooms a light clean, check the mirrors for spots, flush the toilets, restock the paper towels and tissue, and pull the dirty paper towels out of the trash with gloves without changing the bag. A teammate, Alex, had just been promoted to shift manager and was apparently looking to flex his newfound power. I got a radio call. Alex, come in. Me, go ahead. Alex, what's your 20 location? Me, just finished the 390 restrooms. Alex, can you meet me at the 219s? It's clear on the other side of the building, so I hustle over there. Alex, you didn't change this trash bag, there's gum in it. Me, you couldn't just change the bag and tell me later? You have the key. Alex, do it right and this won't be a problem. Next one, I write you up, disciplinary action. If Alex was a welcome teammate before this, I'd have let it go, but he was a sexist jerk to his girlfriend, also a janitor, and he was equally micromanaging to other people on the shift. So we all hatched a plan. Throughout the shift, we'd listen to radio calls to figure where he was. When we finished a job on the other end of campus, we'd radio him to come see something. Alex, okay, I'm here. What's up? Janitor, before we moved on to the next bathroom, we wanted to make sure the mirror is clean enough. How is it? Alex, you had me hike across campus for that? It's fine. Janitor, well, I don't want to be written up, so I want to make sure the work is up to your standard of quality. Other janitor, over radio, Alex, can you meet me in other wing? We have an important question for you. Back and forth, we all just really needed his expert advice to avoid disciplinary action. Alex got the point, but was too afraid of conflict to directly name the insubordination. He stopped micromanaging after one 4-hour shift. The next one is titled, Mum told me to leave so I did. Law enforcement got involved and she lost everything. This happened when I was 15. My mum was, let's be real, she probably still is, a mentally, emotionally, and physically abusive narcissist. Some highlights are when she was teaching my twin sister and I to read at the age of 4 or so. It was around 2 a.m. and my sister was having trouble learning, so my mother's solution was to beat her with a sandal every time she got a flashcard wrong. Same thing happened when my mother had me transcribe an essay she had written to my handwriting when I was 7. Every time I started a letter from the wrong position, like starting a capital M from the bottom line, she would beat me with one of her Birkenstocks. This too happened later at night, so when I got too delirious for the exhaustion and pain, she would drag me by the neck and literally throw me into a cold shower to wake me up so we could more easily continue the waking nightmare. When I was 13, I told her to wanted to live with my dad. They were divorced, and she told me she didn't care what I did after I turned 18. I later figured out that this was because the child support stopped at age 18. Anyhow, fast forward to age 15. Our relationship was understandably strained. We had guests, and she liked to use guests as a way of controlling our behavior through shame. It's easier to be an angsty teenager when your grown-up friends from church aren't watching and judging everything you do. This make it easier for her to pretend to be a firm but loving mother, all while slipping in sideways comments like velvet daggers. Well, I decided I wasn't going to subject myself to the whole thing and spent the day outside in the woods nearby. We lived in the mountains at the time, so it was less than 100 from the house. When I saw our guests had left, I went to go back inside. My mother, perhaps unhappy at being denied a day-long emotional abuse routine, told me I wasn't welcome and that I should leave. My 15-year-old brain heard her words and knew that she only meant for a little while, but it also recognized that failed to specify any time frame at all. So, I hiked a couple miles to a friend's house and asked if I could spend a couple days there. When my friend's dad found out that I was there and why, he was upset and said I could stay as long as I needed. I didn't go home that evening, or the next. My mum became concerned and contacted law enforcement to report me missing. This is a big deal for several reasons. We lived in the mountains on a national park, so it was a very real possibility that I had been attacked by a wild animal, become injured while hiking, drowned, or been kidnapped. Nobody knew of my mother's abusive tendencies or the squalor and neglects my sister and I lived in. Most importantly, the law enforcement was the local park rangers with which she worked daily. Immediately contacted my dad's side of the family to see if I had turned up there or contacted them. They promptly freaked the duck out and came to my house with lawyers on standby. Then hired dogs to track my scent, and then everyone freaked out because the dogs tracked me to a nearby river where my trail died because the dogs couldn't pick up any more scent. Over the next couple days there were people going in and out of my house, rangers, lawyers, my family, etc. And several noticed the overpowering scent of cleaning chemicals, but only the lawyer considered why a clean house would reek of chemicals. Started to canvass the nearby woods and neighborhood. My friend's dad came to me and asked if there was somewhere else I could stay. He told me that he wouldn't kick me out, didn't want to have to lie to the police or let the dogs on his property. My friend and I figured we'd just go camping for a week or so, but instead I looked up my dad's side of the family and called, and they picked me up right away. Understandably, everyone had questions. When I told them what was happening, the lawyers, horrified, pounced. A judge issued an emergency change of custody and prevented her from gaining custody until she underwent a psych evaluation and therapy, which my mother would never allow. The rangers, equally horrified, completely shunned my mother and she eventually lost her job. Since she was only allowed to live on the park because she worked there, so she was kicked out of her house. My friend's father and the trackers were members of the local community and churches, and they too shunned my mother. She lost her job, her house, her church, and her friends, all because she told me to leave and I did. Edit for clarity, I'm 32 now, this happened a while ago. Edit, I wasn't clear and didn't want to make it longer. When my dad's family got involved, they were able to reach an agreement where I would leave with them for a time, but my sister stayed. I had to go back to my mum's for a short while, but the judge issued an emergency change of custody and my sister and I went to live with our dad. My sister and I have been in therapy and she is teaching now. Life isn't perfect, but it's better. Edit, people keep asking about the chemicals. The house was normal, trashed. My mother kept an untrained dog and the carpet was soaked with dog feces and urine. The few times we had guests we would have to crawl around the dog's potty spot and clean it up and make the house smell good. My mum freaked out when she realized that rangers and CPS might come round. She did a deep clean of the house before reporting me missing because she couldn't afford to have them realize what they were walking on. The next one is titled, "Was told to actually read the policy." So I did. I work for an office and we have an 8-week busy season with mandatory overtime 12 to 14 hours per day. During this time, the company agrees to reimburse us for dinner, up to $13 per meal. We just have to submit a claim with our receipts at the end of the busy season. Food options around my work aren't great, so I usually brought my dinner from home. But sometimes I was too tired to cook after a long day, so out of the 8 weeks, I purchased maybe 10 meals. 3 of those meals I spent $13.50, going 50 cents over the limit. This resulted in a whopping $1.50 overage, which my manager said it was no big deal and that I could include on my expense claim. He signed off on it and everything. A few days after I submitted my report, head office emailed me saying they rejected my expense claim and that I could resubmit after I removed the $1.50 overage. I wrote back saying my manager was fine with the $1.50 overage and even signed off on it, and they responded by telling me that they do not allow overages under any circumstances, that the $1.50 must be removed or they wouldn't approve any of my meal expenses. They ended their email with the advice that I should actually read the company policy next time. Fine, they were right and I was wrong. So I decided I'd read the policy very thoroughly before redoing my expense claim. Yes, the policy clearly stated a $13 per maximum on purchased meals. Oh, and what's this? The policy also allows a $10 per diem for meals you bring from home. I very happily removed the $1.50 overage and added an additional $300 for the 30 meals I brought from home. I should read the company policy more often. Edit: some of you are asking if I got paid the $300 and the answer is yes. Many are suggesting the person was sincerely trying to help me out, but I'm not 100% sure because they were so snippy in their email. Also, when we were emailed the meal policy at the beginning of busy season, there was no mention of the per diem and no one else in my department knew about it. Either way, I made sure to thank them just in case they were being sincere and I was just too jaded to see it. The last one is titled, "No extension? No backing down." A few years ago, I was in the process of getting my master's degree. Our group for that particular degree was fairly small. There were a dozen of us when we started, and a few dropped out along the way, so the lectures and seminars were tiny and we all got to know each other well. It wasn't uncommon for classes to continue for several hours over beers down the pub. All in all, a pretty great way to learn. The leader of the program, who also taught one of the units, was awesome. Very anti-establishment punk who just wanted to get on with teaching his subject his way. The higher-ups were in the process of trying to change how everything worked, basically making it much tougher on the students and a lot more bureaucratic. One thing they changed was how extensions were determined for assignments. The way it used to work was you'd have a deadline, but if you needed an extension, the lecturer for that unit could grant one at their discretion. The new process meant that if you needed an extension you'd have to apply to the extensions board, and you wouldn't know if you'd had it approved or not until well past the deadline. You basically had to gamble. If you applied for the extension and handed in your project past the deadline, and your extension wasn't granted at all or wasn't granted for enough time, you'd get a failing mark for being late. It was super stressful, especially for those of us with ongoing reasons for needing them, e.g. me with my health issues. This angered the program leader a lot. As far as he was concerned, it's his course, he knows us all well enough to smell bullshit excuses, his say should be good enough to grant an extension. He carried on handing them out anyway while they were in the process of changing the system, getting into a lot of trouble in the process, but once it was fully changed over, his power to grant them was gone. There was only one major assignment left at this point, the thesis. Most of our class ended up needing extensions for it due to sick children, bereavement, illnesses, and other life stuff that meant you couldn't spend 50 to 60 hours every week on it to meet the deadline. We were all preparing to take the gamble, collect as much evidence as possible, and submit all the ridiculous paperwork with the hope that our entire degree wouldn't be taken away from us thanks to a board of pencil pushers who didn't even know us. A couple of days before the deadline, the course leader gets in touch to gleefully inform us that the morons in charge took away his extension powers, but not his powers to change the actual deadline dates. He figured the best thing to do was to move the deadline 6 months into the future, giving us all more than enough time to not only finish our work but keep improving on it, as an extra special "duck you" to the people stressing out his students and messing with his course. We all graduated, and they couldn't do much about it because he was working perfectly within the rules. Thanks for listening.